The night the watchers fell was not like any other night since the dawn of creation. The skies above the ancient world burned with a strange hue, as if the very fabric trembled. From their posts high in the celestial realms a host of mighty beings looked down upon the earth, beings fashioned in glory, their forms blazing like living fire, their voices like the sound of many waters. These were the watchers, entrusted by the Most High to guard the boundaries between heaven and earth, to watch over mankind and guide them toward righteousness. Yet their eyes lingered too long on the daughters of men. Before we embark on this captivating journey, we would love your support. Hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video with others, and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest stories. Fascination turned to longing, and longing to obsession. They spoke among themselves in whispers that trembled with forbidden desire, until their leader, Samyasa, voiced the thought they had all feared to speak. Let us go down and take them for ourselves. The others hesitated, for they knew such a step would sever them from heaven forever. But desire drowned out duty, and one by one they bound themselves with an oath that none would turn back once their feet touched the soil of the earth. The descent was swift and terrible. The air shook as they broke through the veil between worlds, their brilliance cloaked in a radiance that seemed both beautiful and dangerous. Mountains quaked beneath their landing, rivers stilled, and creatures hid in silence. The women saw them first as shadows of light on the horizon, then as towering figures whose faces shone like polished bronze, eyes burning with an unearthly fire. Fear seized their hearts, for these were not men. And yet that fear was tangled with awe, for never had the daughters of men beheld such majesty. The watchers approached them with voices like music and words that dripped with promises. They spoke of secret knowledge, of beauty that would never fade, of strength that could bend kings to their will. The women's hearts battled between terror and temptation, yet the pull was irresistible. They touched the hands of the angels and felt a power course through them, like rivers of lightning beneath their skin. What began as trembling curiosity became surrender. The unions were sealed not in innocence but in defiance. On hilltops and in shadowed groves, they took the daughters of men as wives. These women became vessels of a mingled seed, neither wholly mortal nor wholly divine, and with each passing season the change in them deepened. Their eyes carried a strange light. Their voices took on a commanding weight. Their beauty became almost unbearable to behold. But within that beauty lay the root of corruption. From these forbidden bonds came children unlike any born before, giants whose first cries rolled like thunder over the hills. They grew faster than mortal children, their bodies towering, their strength unchallenged. They were the Nephilim, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Villages fell under their power, kings bowed to their might, and the common people could not raise a hand against them. The giants carved their names into the mountains, and drank rivers dry, taking whatever they desired without fear of consequence. The watchers taught their wives more than the ways of the bedchamber. They whispered to them the secrets of heaven, how to call down fire, how to read the movements of the stars, how to bend nature to their will. The women passed this knowledge to their children, and soon the earth was filled with enchantments, bloodshed, and the worship of false powers. Metals were forged into weapons of cruelty, roots and herbs twisted into potions of death. What was once a green earth became a stage for slaughter. The Most High had given the watchers their place to preserve creation, but their rebellion had done the opposite. It had birthed a race that threatened to devour the world. The cries of the oppressed rose like smoke to heaven. The rivers ran dark, not with mud, but with the blood of the innocent. And though the women who had once trembled at the sight of the watchers now walked in arrogance beside their giant sons, the shadow of what they had done loomed over them. The earth groaned beneath the weight of this corruption, as though creation itself knew it could not stand for long. And in the courts of heaven, a decree was already forming, one that would bring an end to the reign of the Nephilim, the power of the wives, and the freedom of the fallen ones. But for now the giants roamed unchecked. The watchers gazed upon their works with pride, and the daughters of men wore crowns they were never meant to bear. The seeds of destruction had been sown, and their roots had sunk deep into the heart of the earth. At first they had been afraid, trembling beneath the gaze of the watchers, caught between the awe of their beauty and the terror of their power. They had not sought such unions. They were drawn into them by the overwhelming presence of beings whose voices could bend the will. Yet as days turned to seasons, the fear that once gripped their hearts began to fade. In its place came something far more dangerous, a hunger. The wives discovered that life beside the fallen angels was unlike any mortal life. They no longer rose before dawn to carry water from the river or toil under the sun. Their steps grew lighter, their eyes sharper, their reflections almost unrecognizable. The whispers of their husbands promised more beauty, more strength, more influence. And the women began to believe it. What had once been innocence was now laced with ambition. The watchers opened their hands and poured secrets into them. How to weave metals into weapons sharper than the fangs of wolves. How to grind herbs into potions that could heal or kill. How to read the stars and bend the seasons. But with every secret given, a thread of corruption wound itself deeper into their souls. What had begun as a gift became a chain, binding them to the darkness their husbands carried. At night, under the cover of starlight, the wives gathered in hidden places. They drew symbols into the earth, spoke words that shimmered like heat over stone, and called upon powers they could not fully understand. The air in those places grew heavy, and animals would not cross the ground they marked. They had become vessels, not of life as they were created to be, but of the forbiddens. It was not long before the fruits of this corruption bled into the world around them. The Nephilim, their giant sons, became warlords and tyrants. Villages were emptied, fields burned, and rivers choked with the dead. The wives, standing beside these towering figures, did not weep for the fallen. Instead, they stood as queens, wearing jewels torn from the conquered, their voices ordering the next raid, the next sacrifice. The sacrifices grew darker with each passing year. Fires were lit on high places, and living offerings, both animal and human, were laid upon altars. The smell of burning flesh rose into the wind, carrying with it the cries of the innocent. Mothers wept as children were taken. Men fought hopeless battles against enemies they could not overpower. The wives watched with eyes that no longer knew pity. But the corruption did not stop at the borders of the physical. In their pursuit of power, the wives opened gateways in the unseen realm. Spirits not of God passed through, drawn by the rituals, feeding on the blood spilled in their honor. The earth itself seemed to shudder beneath the weight of it, the soil souring, the sky dimming, the air thick with dread. The laughter of the wives at their feasts rang hollow against the groans of a creation pushed beyond its limits. From the valleys to the mountain tops, the cries of the oppressed rose. Farmers prayed for deliverance as their fields were trampled. Widows wept into the dust. Children called for parents who would never return. And though the wives heard these cries, they were unmoved, their hearts hardened by the power that coursed through them. But in the heavens nothing was hidden. The sound of the earth's suffering reached the throne of the Most High. Angels turned their faces away from the stench of the sacrifices, and the hosts of heaven grieved over what the watchers and their wives had wrought. The corruption had not only scarred the land, it had defiled the very image of humanity. And so in the courts of heaven the decree began to form. The days of the wives' reign would be numbered. Their crowns, their spells, their thrones of blood, all would be shattered. The cry of the earth had been heard, and the answer would come with fire. The throne room of heaven shimmered with a brilliance beyond mortal comprehension. Vast pillars of living light stretched upward into infinity, and the floor beneath was like a sea of glass, reflecting the glory that radiated from the one seated on the throne. Thunder rolled softly in the distance, not from storms, but from the very heartbeat of eternity. Into this sacred place came the archangels, mighty beings who had never turned from their posts, their wings cloaked in reverence. They gathered in a great circle, faces bowed low, for the summons of the Most High had gone out, and none could delay. At the center the voice of God rose, not loud, yet it shook every realm it touched. The crimes of the watchers were laid bare. They had abandoned their stations, defiled the daughters of men, birthed a race that defied the created order, and poured corruption into the earth. But this time the judgment extended beyond them. For the wives, the women who had once been innocent, had become not just partners in sin, but leaders of rebellion, their hands red with the blood of the innocent. There was no debate in heaven about the guilt of the fallen angels. Their fate was sealed. Chains of darkness awaited them. But the wives were different. They were human, shaped from the dust, made in the image of God. To destroy them entirely would tear at the hearts of those who had been their unseen guardians since birth. Yet their corruption was now so deep that mercy alone would not heal it. If they were left, the seed of rebellion would live on, and the Nephilim would rise again. It was then that the Most High turned his gaze to one, Michael, prince of the heavenly armies, the one who had stood against the dragon in ages past. His armor gleamed like molten gold. His sword at his side pulsed with holy fire, yet his expression was solemn. From the throne came a charge unlike any he had received before. The punishment of the fallen angels would be carried out by many, but the fate of the wives, that would be his alone. This was no ordinary order. Michael was not merely to end their lives. He was to erase their names from the memory of mankind, to strip away their influence so completely that they could never again be worshipped as goddesses or remembered as queens. He was to cut the thread of their legacy from history itself. Only the heavenly record would bear witness to what they had been. Around the throne, the host of heaven stirred. Some wept, their tears like silver rain that fell silently upon the sea of glass. They remembered the days when these women had been young and pure, unaware of the snare being laid for them. They had once sung to their children, cared for their families, and walked in the light. But that light had been extinguished, replaced by a fire that consumed all around it. Now the justice of God demanded a reckoning. Michael bowed his head, receiving the command without question. yet within him burned a weight he had never felt before. To destroy cities, to bring down kings, these were acts of war. But to bring judgment upon human women, those who bore the image of the Creator, even in their corruption, would be unlike anything he had done. The decree was sealed. The countdown to judgment had begun. Across the heavens, armies readied themselves not for the wives, but for the giants and their angelic fathers. Michael, however, prepared in silence. His sword was sharpened, his heart steady, but his spirit carried a sorrow deeper than words. The moment of descent was drawing near, and when it came, the earth would witness an act so complete, so final, that its echo would remain until the end of the age. The hour came when heaven could wait no longer. From the high courts of glory, a brilliance unlike the sun poured forth, spilling across the veil between realms. Out of that radiance stepped Michael, the archangel whose name means, "Who is like God?" His armor blazed like liquid gold, etched with runes that burned with living light. Across his back, wings like molten bronze stretched wide, each feather tipped with fire. In his hand he carried a sword forged before time itself, its blade humming with the sound of creation's breath. Behind him marched an unnumbered host, warriors of pure flame and lightning, their eyes fixed on the earth below. The descent was swift yet terrible. Clouds tore apart in their wake, and the sky darkened as though the sun had hidden in fear. The mountains trembled beneath their approach, and the seas roared against their boundaries. Man and beasts felt the weight of their coming. Even the wind seemed to bow before them. In the valleys below, the wives of the fallen gathered. Some stood in defiance, clothed in the silks and jewels stolen from conquered nations. Their eyes glittered with arrogance, drunk on the power their angelic husbands had given them. They whispered to one another, speaking curses against heaven, convinced their charms and enchantments could turn aside the holy host. Others, sensing the end, wept and tore their garments, begging for the mercy they had once scorned. But whether pleading or mocking, they stood in the shadow of judgment. The ground shook as Michael's feet touched the earth. His gaze swept across them, and in that gaze was no hatred, only the unshakable justice of the one who sent him. He spoke not a word, yet the air itself carried the command of heaven. The wives felt their power falter. The spirits they had called on in secret fled like smoke before a storm. Still, some clung to their pride, raising their hands in defiance, chanting words of forbidden magic that cracked the air like splintering glass. Then the clash began. Light collided with darkness in an eruption that split the sky. The armies of heaven surged forward, their swords tearing through the ranks of the Nephilim, who roared in fury. The giants' weapons shattered against shields of living flame, their strength nothing before the will of God. The very earth joined the battle. Mountains split, rivers turned to steam, and storms spun from nothing, lashing the ground with rain like spears. The wives fought in their own way, hurling curses, summoning unnatural fire, twisting the winds to strike at their enemies. But every act of defiance was swallowed by the greater light that poured from Michael's sword. It was not the light of the sun, nor the fire of earthly flame. It was the pure, unyielding brilliance of the Creator's holiness. And then came the act that would be remembered in heaven, but forgotten on earth. Michael raised his sword high, and the world seemed to hold its breath. When the blade fell, it did not merely strike the ground. It tore through the threads of history itself. The names of the wives, their stories, their faces, and their deeds began to unravel, erased from the memory of mankind. Temples crumbled, idols turned to dust, and scrolls that bore their images burned with invisible fire. They were not only slain, they were removed, as though they had never been. Their influence was stripped from the earth, their lineages severed, their power scattered like ash on the wind. Only the heavenly record would bear witness to what had been done. When it was over, silence fell heavy upon the land. The storms faded, the earth stilled, and the host of heaven withdrew. Michael stood alone for a moment, his sword lowered, the fire in his wings dimmed to a soft glow. In his eyes was the weight of what had been done, not triumph, but the solemn finality of justice fulfilled. The light of Michael's sword did not fade when the wives fell. It rippled outward like waves on a boundless sea, touching not only the battlefield, but the very fabric of the world. In its path, the remnants of their existence began to unravel. Stone statues carved in their likeness crumbled into dust. Paintings and carvings on the walls of temples peeled away, leaving only blank surfaces where their images had once commanded worship. Scrolls and clay tablets bearing their names cracked and fell apart in an unseen fire. It was as though the hand of history itself had been rewritten, tearing out every page that spoke of them. No memory of their beauty, no echo of their songs, no record of their reign would remain for the generations to come. They would not be remembered as queens, goddesses, or mothers of giants. They would be nothing, erased so completely that even the tongues of storytellers would find no words to speak of them. Only in the courts of heaven would the truth be kept, sealed away as a testimony before the eternal judge. But Michael's work was not finished. The corruption they had sown into the earth still pulsed beneath the surface. The knowledge given by the fallen angels, the sorceries, the enchantments, the manipulation of creation itself still whispered from hidden places. With every step he took, those whispers grew silent. Caves where forbidden scrolls were hidden trembled and collapsed. Altars erected for blood rites cracked down the middle and bled no more. The chains of influence that bound men to the will of darkness snapped like twine in a storm. The Nephilim, the towering offspring of these unholy unions, felt the weight of heaven's decree. One by one, they were hunted down, not by mortal hands, but by the angelic host who moved with the swiftness of light. Their roars echoed through valleys, their falls shook the mountains, but none could stand against the army of the Most High. Where they fell, the ground closed over them, burying the last trace of their dominion. Then, at last, it was done. The battlefield lay in ruins. The air hung still, as though the wind itself feared to move. The host of heaven withdrew in silence, their white banners dimmed, their faces marked by the solemnity of what had been accomplished. Michael stood alone for a time, gazing over the empty fields. The cries of war had ceased, yet the silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The land bore the scars. Forests once green had been stripped bare. Rivers, though they ran clear again, seemed slower, as if mourning what they had carried away. The people who had survived looked upon the quiet with hollow eyes, unable to name the terror they had seen, for the names were gone, yet the wounds remained. They would speak of that day in broken fragments, never fully understanding, yet never forgetting the dread that settled into their bones. Then came the shudder. It began deep in the earth, a low tremor that spread across hills and seas. The sky darkened, not with storm clouds, but with a shadow that passed like a warning. In the heavens it was known for what it was, a sign. Though the wives were gone and their influence cut away, the spirit of their rebellion was not dead. One day in the distant reaches of time, such corruption would rise again, dressed in new forms, but carrying the same defiance. Michael turned his face toward the throne of God, his task complete, yet his heart heavy. Justice had been done, but justice was never without a cost. As he ascended with the armies of light, the earth lay still beneath him, silent, cleansed, yet marked forever by what had been. In the archives of heaven, where no shadow can fall and no lie can breathe, the record remains. Sheltered beneath the gaze of the Ancient of Days, it is written in letters of living light, the full account of the wives of the fallen angels, their rise to power, their descent into corruption, and the day they were erased from the memory of the earth. No human historian will ever find their names in the dust of ruins or etched in the stones of ancient temples. No bard will sing their praises, no legend will tell of their beauty. Yet in heaven's library their story is preserved, unaltered, a warning to every realm that the defiance of the Creator carries a price beyond imagining. Michael knows this record well. He stood at its center, his sword the pen that sealed their fate. Now, far from the battlefield, he walks in the silence of heaven's gardens, his armor dimmed, the fire of his wings at rest. He remembers their faces, some hardened with pride, others wet with tears in their final moments. He remembers the young among them whose innocence had been stolen before they even understood what they had become. There is no triumph in his heart, only the sober weight of justice carried out. Though he is the champion of heaven's armies, Michael is no stranger to sorrow. The destruction of the wives was necessary, yet necessity is not joy. He knows they could have walked another path had they resisted the gifts of the Watchers, had they turned from the power that poisoned their souls. But they did not, and in the balance of eternity their choices left no room for mercy unaccompanied by judgment. Still, the story is not locked in the past. The Most High has decreed that their fall is not merely a record of history, but a mirror of what will come. In the scrolls of prophecy, it is written that in the last days the corruption of the Watchers will rise again. Not in the same form, not with the same faces, but with the same spirit. Men and women will once more open their hearts to forbidden knowledge, will hunger for power without restraint, and will trade the truth for the lie. The earth will again be filled with violence, with the twisting of creation's order, and with a beauty that hides rebellion beneath its skin. To the angels, the warning is clear. Guard your posts, for the temptation to abandon them comes with a terrible end. To mankind, the message is silent yet pressing. The unseen war has not ceased, and the choice between light and darkness is never without consequence. On the day the wives were purged, Michael left more than silence in his wake. Deep in the spiritual fabric of the world, invisible to human eyes, he pressed the final seal of his mission, a mark only the heavenly host and the forces of darkness can see. To angels, it is a reminder of the cost of betrayal. To demons, it is a scar they cannot erase, a wound in their pride that bleeds whenever they approach it. To the Most High, it is a sign that His justice is perfect, His word unbroken. This seal will remain until the end of the age, when the final war will be fought, and the rebellion that began with the Watchers will meet its ultimate end. Until then, the earth turns, unaware of the battle fought in its skies, unaware of the names erased to protect its future. But heaven remembers, and heaven warns. Michael lifts his eyes toward the horizon of eternity. The war is not over, but the victory of that day stands as a pillar in the history of creation. The day the wives of the fallen angels were judged, their influence destroyed, and their memory removed, so that the order of the Creator might stand unchallenged. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. That's the only way you can help us. Keep telling the truth that saves.